What is the worst thing you've ever seen someone do at a funeral? The gentleman had a large family and all of his siblings got up and made it all about themselves. Dredged up old family drama. Made it clear that they resented his wife, etc. It was so painfully awkward. Reminds me of the movie Knives Out. Oh, I love that movie. Saw it in theaters, but had absolutely no idea what it was about before seeing it. Highly recommend that movie to everyone. He handed out his business cards at his stepdaughter's funeral. There was very nearly a fist fight. Dwight, good morning. Dwight Scroot. Thank you all for your prayers and your remembrances. Like Justin and his disfigurement. I too have had a horrible year. They say that the middle class is disappearing. And with it, the soul of America. So, as a gift to this beautiful congregation, I would like to offer a 4% discount on all Dunder Mifflin Sabre products if you buy a printer at full price. Edit. Thank you Ann and me AskRedditor for the award. It felt like cheating the system of being awarded for literally copying and pasting a quote. It seems like for many instances we face in life, the office always has a reference. Bob Vance. Vance Refrigeration. What line of work are ya in? Bob. Despite all of the ridiculous things Ryan has said, this simple line is my favorite of his. I had a fit of hysterical laugh at my father's funeral just about the time people started to gather at the mortuary. In my defense, my mother had a nervous breakdown. My father died 4 days after we found out he had lung cancer. There was a lot of shitty stuff surrounding the funeral organization. My mom just flipped. My siblings were 15 and lost, so I was at 23 left to handle it all. I kinda lost it. This happened to my aunt after her husband had committed suicide. It was a nervous release, but I bet she wished it was something like a shaky leg instead. I'm really sorry you had all that responsibility end up on your shoulders. Hope things are better for you now. Yeah, it was just that kind of moment. Totally inappropriate, and yet painfully human. As I wrote, it was some time ago. Hug. Not a funeral, but when my granddad passed and we went to view his body at the crematorium, my aunt started stealing from the facility the second the employee's back was turned. Just shoving anything that wasn't nailed down into her purse and pockets. Unbelievable. And yes, we called her out and made her put it all back. Do you mind me asking, WTF the public spaces of a crematorium have worth stealing? In my opinion, nothing. According to my aunt, the pence, the miniature display urns, a candy dish with the candy, and some other random bits and pieces. I have no idea what her thought process was, if there even was one. Klepto. I have kleptomania. When it gets bad I take something for it. Her ex told us about all the great things she did in bed, and what a loss for mankind that is, in present of her boyfriend. If you don't die in battle, having the above said at your funeral means you still get into Valhalla. In this case, I think it would be Valhalla. Valhalla fame. My brother-in-law is a mortician. Boy does he have stories. One of the best, a guy disguised himself as a nun. Shows up at the funeral. Pulls a gun from under his habit and tries to shoot the deceased son. Luckily the gun malfunctioned and didn't fire. The son then decks the nan and knocks him out. Kicks him in the head a few times. And is pulled off by other family. Police are called. Yada yada yada. Turns out the deceased owed the nun quite a lot of money and the son had refused to honor the debt. Don't start nun won't be none. Nowhere near as bad as most comments, but the family didn't allow for his twin to speak. Straight up skipped over the allocated time for the living twin to get up and speak about his brother, who was his last remaining immediate family. I don't think I can ever forgive the late wife for putting him through that. She treated him so horribly all throughout the sickness. And then to not allow him to be a part of the funeral was the final nail in the coffin. Edit. I didn't think this would resonate with people, and I'm truly shocked. Please consider making a donation to your local cancer research foundation, or donating stem cells. Cancer sucks. I disagree. I think this as bad as any here. The cruelty is inexcusable. I thought you were going to say I disagree. That twin absolutely deserved the misery he got, and was about to downvote you so quick. They had us in the first half. One of my students' mother died. I went to the funeral with the principal and the student's integration aide. After the funeral her father walked up to her and her grandmother and said, I want her out of the house by tomorrow morning. She was 11 years old. Why would the father want to get rid of his own daughter? Because some parents don't love their children at all. My friend's soon-to-be ex-husband has said twice to me that he regrets having his children because he doesn't have time for gaming and his hobbies. He said it matter-of-factly to the room. I'm glad she's ditching that loser. I hope he gives up custody of the children, Jesus. A few years back, when the uncle of my mother died, my young cousin, 8, cried a lot at the funeral. It took some time, but eventually he calmed down and his parents went for a little walk with him for some distraction. But then he noticed that his first name was written on one of the tombstones. He mentions it loudly and one of the bystanders said, "Yeah, it's already reserved for you." He immediately started crying again. That sounds like something my dad would do. My goodness. When my grandmother died, my uncle got muddled up with the name on the gravestone and the mason chiseled my dad's name on it by mistake, who is very much alive. They didn't bother getting it changed. Anyway, several years later my dad said that he'd prefer to be cremated. I said that's a shame, because it would be nice to visit a grave, to have a bit of a chit chat. He said you already can. They didn't bother getting it changed. Why? It's not like it's written in stone. Haha. My uncle was pissed about something in my grandmother's will, so during the funeral, he went out to the parking lot and keyed everyone's car. It should be noted, he has severe brain injury from a motorcycle accident that causes him to be constantly angry and paranoid. Still, damn bro, this probably one of the worst. What a pig. It is. Even with the understanding he has a brain injury, it's bad. He also punched me in the jaw that day. His brain injury might explain his behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. I'm sorry you had to experience that. It doesn't excuse it. But if no one is wanting to help, kind of shit to bitch about a guy whose hardware doesn't function. Dude is trapped in there and unable to maintain control. Dude needs help. My husband went to his great aunt's funeral, and while they did the little ceremony in the cemetery, great aunt's granddaughters were all hiding behind a tombstone giggling and doing coke. Edit. Guys, her grandkids were like 17 to 23. I thought you were going say playing hide and seek behind the tombstone. That took a much different turn than expected. Hide and tweak. My sister murdered her father, my stepfather. At the time we didn't know she was guilty. BTW, just so you know, she did this purely for financial gain. During the viewing she dragged her little boy to the casket, and because he didn't cry enough to suit her she pinched him on the upper arm until he was sobbing, then took him around to everyone saying he was really crying because he loved his gramps so much. Well, you win. In categories of winning. Holy shit man. That's fucked up. And the award for number one asshole goes to this guy's sister. Hooray. Congratulations. My nan told my dad at his own father's funeral that her pain was much greater because she had lost her husband while he had only lost his dad. As if grief is a competition. She is a shitty person anyway, and not even blood related to us, so we just kinda don't associate anymore. My mother is like this. 25 years after they divorced, and she doesn't understand why it had any effect on me. It should not have, because it was her divorce, not mine. My dad died from an overdose when I was 12, the night before Christmas Eve, and I found him. That being said, I'm cool with it nowadays. My aunt talk about him like when my brother died when speaking about it to me, and when I tried to be like, hey, he was my dad, I was a daddy's girl. He was a great father, and I found him. Can I like have a hug or something? She pretty much explained it like I had more time on earth with him, so I miss him more than you could. Fuck that. I'm sorry. It's all good. Thank you though. My aunt crawled into her father's open casket. I knew a guy who climbed up into the casket with his grandfather. This one sweet and wholesome. He was around 4 years old. He wasn't sure what was going on, and people weren't giving him much attention. He asked someone what his grandfather was doing in a box at the front of the room. A relative, thinking they were explaining death in an age-appropriate way, told him that grandpa went to sleep and won't wake up again. So we went up to the casket and climbed up. The room froze in shock. Then he said, "Good night, grandpa," and he kissed him. Adults told him later you could hear a pin drop and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It's a terrible day for rain. Yes, sir. It is. Unexpected. Full Metal Alchemist. At my father's funeral, One of my aunts asked my mom when would she get out of the house. It's always awful to hear about greed ruining the family over the deceased person's will. It really shows people's true colors and proves that they were just waiting for the person to die rather than trying to enjoy their remaining time with them. Always breaks my heart. When my stepdad died, 62 motorcycle accident, his brother-in-law was calling and asking about his gun collection. It wasn't even 4 hours. For Christ's sake, his body probably wasn't even cold. My dad died, and one day later a friend called and said her family wanted to buy his car. Haha. At my mum's funeral at the graveside, this old guy came up to me and said, "Hi, you don't know me. I used to work with your mother. She borrowed a book from me a little while ago. Could you keep an eye out for it and give it back?" "Yes mate, I will keep an eye out for it and use the pages for toilet paper." My grandpa died. His son, my uncle, went around asking for money to give to his now widowed mother. He collected around $500 worth of donations from family, friends, etc. He pocketed it, and my grandma didn't receive shit. I hope he's been excommunicated from the family now. Sadly, no. He's unemployed and my mom regularly sends money over to support his own family. My grandma was like that with her son. In her eyes, he never did wrong. He's in his 60s, and I think he's worked maybe a month. She believed in him until the end, which came at his hands. He visited a dozen ATMs later that day to drain her account. I'm really sorry you've got a lousy uncle. Jesus. At his hands. How horrible. Not seen but experienced. My cousin's wife was kicking the back of my chair at my granda's funeral. Also carrying on a conversation with my sister, who was supposedly really sad the whole way through the service. For context, I was 14 and my cousin's wife was in her mid to late 30s. You were more mature than her. Not really. I was ranting about to my parents then, and I still rant about it now. Still more mature. My mother-in-law took a photo of a wine glass during the lunch we had after, and she posted it on Facebook. Guess what her caption was? "Life is grand." It was my mother's funeral. I'm impressed in a twisted way that people can reach new levels of assholeness when I thought I'd heard it all. And when she was asked to take it down, she couldn't understand why. My uncle died, and at his funeral my cousin, his son, was crying. Some old timer uncle came up to him and said, "Stop crying, you're a man, you're embarrassing us." I never wanted to slap someone at a funeral more than at that moment. You cold slap that man right in the face and it would still be more appropriate than whatever the fuck he did. He could have made that idiot need a funeral too. At my grandfather's funeral, one of the choir members essentially threw a tantrum and ended up interrupting one of my uncles who was giving a speech just because she wasn't given any food. The thing is, there wasn't any food at the funeral to begin with. I'm trying to think of some caveat that makes this not completely insane. Diabetic emergency? She felt entitled to a free meal because she's done a lot of work. My aunt ended up throwing a chair at her head. My uncle was cremated. He lived across from a lake, and it was decided that we wanted his ashes spread on this little island on this lake. I was tasked with swimming with the urn from the boat to the island, holding it out of the water. I then stood at the edge of a small cliff with my nephews beside me and all the family watching in the boat. I opened the urn to dump his ashes over the cliff. We all say a few things, and as I go to dump the ashes, the wind picks up and blows the ashes all over my wet body. One of the worst things that ever happened to me. Oh, I had this happen as a river guide. Family brought grandma's ashes to release into pristine wilderness on a glacial river on a mellow float trip. Dad slips and drops them all over the raft instead. Everyone starts crying hysterically that he had fucked up. I interrupted, telling them, "Hold up, no crying yet." Now the stretch of river we were on was flat for miles. Scenic and gorgeous. No rough spots. Except, suddenly, I dropped the raft into the only massive hole, splashy wave, 4 miles, washing grandma off the raft and soaking the family. The water was bloody cold, and they all started at me in horror before laughing hysterically. Apparently grandma was a bit of a jokester and would have appreciated that exit instead. I'm a river guide as well, and God forbid you have a fellow guide pass. But the ceremonies we've had for guides who have passed are some of the most touching things I've ever been a part of. I keep some of my buddy's ashes with me everywhere and spread him in every new section I run. There isn't a feeling like dropping a big rapid surrounded by rose petals and getting to run with your friend one last time. Long live Sasquatch. That beautiful bastard. After the eulogist had talked for 45 minutes, the pastor went over to the lectern and politely asked him to conclude his eulogy. The guy boldly told the pastor, "I'll stop when I'm damn good and ready," and proceeded talking for about 20 more minutes. The total funeral church service lasted for 2¾ hours. It seemed endless. I'm clergy and had this exact thing happen. I'm a stickler for having people write their eulogies down with a page limit for this reason. This guy had wanted to be a minister and didn't make it, so just loved the podium. The family told me he might stand up and talk for a while, but I understood that they respected him and wanted him to talk, even if they didn't agree. So I let him talk a little longer than I usually would. Then I stood up next to him. Then I put my arm around him. Then I whispered he should wrap it up. He shook me off and went on for another while. I'm quite left-wing and my specialty is doing funerals that are respectful to the non-Christians in the room while still being true to the tradition. This guy had abhorrent theology, but also it was a community funeral and his theology was common locally. Being territorial wasn't the right thing. I felt awful about it. Worse, years later, when I found out the family had warned me to stop him and I'd misunderstood. I actually hate funerals because the family dynamics are so crazy. Also, the funeral business is weird. I'm not sure I've ever been entirely satisfied with a funeral. My father is a Catholic deacon and his specialty seems to be funerals as well. Like you, he's faithful to the tradition, but doesn't seem to alienate anyone. I used to be an altar boy for some of them, easy money as a kid, and I heard so many times something to the effect of, "If this is what a Catholic funeral is like, then I want one when I die." It was strange, because I grew up in an area with lots of Baptist/Pentecostal/evangelicals and the same type of people would tell me why I was going to hell during my childhood. If you are new to Tattletale TV, please subscribe. We have new videos every day. Stay tuned for more coming up next.